All right, ceramics, I'm coming at you today with just some tips and tricks for kind of working up your pot. Some questions I had over the week about cracking coils, how to smooth things out, and just some fine details. So this is the pot I started during our demo last week. And you can see that now it's like a little bit stiffer. It's not as squishy as it was before. So as we work on these, they're going to stiffen up to leather hard, which is good as we grow up so they can support the weight of your clay. That just means you don't want to pick them up and flex them too much. If you flex the clay too much, it will actually crack and break. So you want to make sure you're working on that piece of cardboard, or just like when you're lifting them to move them, just lifting them really carefully. So one of the big questions I had was that I had some problems with cracking coils. So there's a couple reasons why you might have that. If you're starting from a piece of clay that is too big and you're trying to roll your coils out, you're going to take a lot of moisture out of the clay with your hands. So I'm starting from something like this big and trying to roll that coil out. I'm pulling so much moisture out of it that by the time it's a coil, it is too dry to use. So make sure that you're squeezing your coils out to like hot dog size before you start rolling. And then go ahead and roll. Remember, don't push too hard. You don't also have to make giant coils, like, they don't have to be super long, so you don't have to like roll out mile-long coils every time you're working. Another reason why they might crack is like when you're bending them, if they're skinnier than your finger, then they're more likely to crack because it's just like a smaller diameter of clay. But if I feel like as I'm just like gently turning this, if the clay is cracking, remember, grab your sponge, get it in your water. And if they're really dry, you can have a decent bit of moisture in this. Don't try to do it in the air. You'll definitely crack and break them. Rest it on the table gently. Just hold one side and brush across that. Gently flip your coil over, brush across that. And you might want to do this a couple times. Set the coil aside and then do it again if you feel like your clay is really cracking. And then I should be able to bend and flex this pretty easily. Another thing you can do is if you've noticed that your clay that you're working with is really hard, grab it and dump it into your water. Squish some of that moisture back into the clay. It's going to get like a little bit slippy and muddy. You can do that a couple different times. Just squeeze some moisture back into it. Got to kind of like self-recycle at home. Squeeze that clay. And then it's a little bit hard to work with and it's really, really slippery. I'm just gonna squeeze that clay. And then before I roll it, I'm gonna wipe it off with a paper towel just to get the slip off the outside. Otherwise, it's really hard to roll because it slides on the table so much. Or I can just let it sit to the side for a second, let the outer edge just dry up a little bit. But you really want to get moisture back into the inside of that clay so that as you roll it and then you go to bend it up to apply it on, it doesn't crack. The next thing to make sure that you're doing, especially between days, and really you should be between each coil, is making sure that you're slipping and scoring. So make sure you're going through your edges. And if you're finding that you are having cracking, it's probably because you're not slipping and scoring deep enough, or you're not melding quite enough of the clay. So after I slip or score, I'm going to go through with some water. I'm going to do the same thing to my coil. Make sure you're not just surface scoring, kind of don't be afraid to go into that coil a little bit deep. And I'm going to take and apply that coil on top of where I'm adding it. I'm going to compress it down a little bit. That's one step that you don't want to forget because it will suction that clay together so you really don't lose. So like it should feel hard to pull off after you suction it down. Like I'm pulling up on this and it's not coming off because now those pieces have been kind of Velcroed or glued together. And then if it's hard to smooth it down, remember, don't use your thumb or like the finger. You want to use your fingernail or use your actual little popsicle stick tool, support on the inside, and then you can meld that clay down. Remember, you can do a couple layers at a time before you meld if you'd like, but make sure you meld before you're done working for the day. Otherwise, it will be hard to do that the next day if that clay becomes leather hard. Sometimes it's hard to get in there with the tool, so just kind of the tip of your finger does work as long as you're using your fingernail. Another thing that's really important to remember is as you're working, You don't want to have like a bunch of messiness on the inside, especially if you're going to get more narrow. It's going to be hard to get down inside of there. So make sure after you meld that you go in, and you don't want to have a lot of moisture on your sponge. I just want to go in and make sure that inside is really nice and smooth. Smooth out my edges. And then now it's pretty nice and clean on the inside. If you're getting to it, an area where it's like really thin and you can't get inside, you could always take that paintbrush that you have in your kit and then go in and smooth any edges together there. If you happen to see cracking the next day, make sure that you score through your crack and then add a little bit of clay, and then add a little bit of water first, and then mush your clay into it and then meld that in, and it should help seal up any cracking that you have. Again, make sure you're bagging really well in between each day. This clay is probably ready now that I've added moisture to, that I could roll out some coils with it now, and it's not going to crack. It's got that moisture back into it. One thing that you can do, always make sure your clay is bagged as you're working, but when you're putting your clay away, if you feel like you've touched it a lot with your hands and you've rolled out those coils and you're going to smash them back together, make sure that you try to compress and squeeze them as much as possible, so we're not having a bunch of air pockets inside there. I'm not going to wedge, but we'll do the best we can. Just dip it in a little bit of water and then put it in your bag. Got some other clay here that's been sitting out. Especially if the clay starts to feel a little bit cold, you're definitely losing a little bit of moisture. Just dip it in the water a little bit. Throw it in your bag. Remember to either zip tie it or have it rest on its opening so that you're not losing any moisture. Make sure, again, really carefully lifting your pot into a bag or over the board that you're working on. Try to get as much air out of there as possible. Air is our enemy when it comes to bagging projects. Just like gently tie this shut. If you feel like your project is drying out too fast, go over it with a wet sponge. You could even add like a wet paper towel overnight, not like soaping wet, like not super soggy, but just like to add a little extra moisture to it. And I think that's all the questions I had in emails and comments in Google Classroom. If you have anything else for Wednesday for our live session, let me know, and I will